Thank you, Jonathan. Jack Heath, J Dog on the boards. Happy New Year. Happy 2026. And by the way, a little bit of history on this day before we get to the big news. And J Dog, I hope you had a okay New Year's break as we get going. This date, J Dog, you know this because the sign about New Hampshire's Constitution is right on our Binney Media corporate headquarters, media headquarters, former Walker School in Concord near the Capitol property. This is the date in history, J Dog, January 5th, 1776, when New Hampshire became the first colony to really break away from the British Crown and adopt its own constitution. Pretty early, bold, live free or die move to break away from the British. We're going to hear from a great historian and fan of history from Portsmouth and another person on the origins of really our American Revolution. But on that note, a lot to talk about, J-Dog. We'll catch up with you in a moment and as we get going, but we have a packed show for you. We're going to be hearing from Dean Spiliotis, Southern New Hampshire University. In a few moments, one of our political science experts on all the news in and around Venezuela, the capture of Maduro, and today he'll be and his wife are going to be in a New York court for arraignment on narco terrorism charges and other charges. That's today. We're going to hear from Dean and also a little bit later on Anna Brown, Citizens Count, talking about some of the big pieces of legislation coming to New Hampshire State House. We're going to get a check-in from Michael Graham on some polling numbers. A little bit later on, we're going to hear from Sue Polidora and another great expert on history on this date in history, which unfortunately I wish more people appreciated, especially New Hampshire's early history. It's an amazing source of really wisdom to look at early history in New Hampshire. Talk about a bedrock for independence in America. And of course, it wasn't until quite a while later with General John Stark, not quite a while, but a while later, who in the letter to his troops at the Battle of Bennington, when he was too older and sickly to go on their anniversaries, penned the words, "Live free or die. Death is not the worst of all evils," and amongst other things to his troops, later becoming the state motto. And today people drive around, move here, live here, don't really understand and appreciate the meaning of that live free or die motto. They should, or New Hampshire's history, and they should. We'll come back to that in the 10 o'clock hour. All right, a lot of news to digest over the weekend, and I don't have the New Hampshire federal congressional delegation reaction statements in front of me, which were posted over the weekend and put out by each office. I'm mainly talking Senator Shaheen, Senator Hassan, Chris Pappas, 1st District, Maggie Goodlander. But I'm going to say this out of the gate in some commentary and perspective, just cutting right to the chase. Representative Pappas, who's running for the U.S. Senate, I think was the most appropriate by at least referencing the very successful and precise strategic operation and successful operation of the United States military. Let me be very clear. There's one nation on earth that could even have pulled this operation off, and it should not have been any surprise to anyone. How I'd been saying for days and weeks on the show going right into New Year's last week, no one's really paying attention to Venezuela. No one's really paying attention to Venezuela. We have an aircraft carrier. We have CIA and special ops on the ground. Pretty much the world knew this. President Trump told Maduro not once, but how many times, give up, surrender. We'll let you go to another country. You stay in there. Not going to end well for you. So Trump becomes the first president in a while. As Marco Rubio said this weekend, Secretary of State on Sunday, just shutting up a lot of the people who are saying this, this is outrageous that Trump did this. He does what he says. Marco Rubio said what he say. A buddy of mine was telling me this morning, he said Rubio's been in Washington for almost 2 decades. He said a lot of presidents come down here and talk and talk and talk. And Trump says he's going to do something. He does it. The least surprised person on the planet should have been Maduro and his wife, that our Delta team and our SEALs went in there and yanked him out of his presidential confines and put him on a chopper or a plane to come back and a base to come back to the U.S. and to a jail in New York City. He challenged Trump and he lost. But this should have been no surprise to anyone. You looked at the presence we had in Venezuela, and I'm not just talking the hits on the the drug boats. I'm talking about our military presence. We did a full-blown blockade. We had the seized tankers that were flying under, breaking a lot of the sanctions. This was no surprise. But what I look at since this has happened, and let me be very clear, if Kamala Harris had won the election and had gone and gotten Maduro, people would be clapping from the rooftops in this country. And they are. There's a lot more positive reaction to this capture in places like Miami, Florida, where exiled Venezuelans are thrilled to go back to a better country. And even the pontiff, Pope, talking about human rights. I think human rights might be a little better without this guy. Let me just give you some perspective. In the Obama administration, that was quite a while ago, they declared Venezuela a strategic threat to the United States. Does anyone remember Joe Biden? I just mentioned Kamala Harris. The Biden administration, the last year of the administration, with the national security advisor, now a Portsmouth, New Hampshire, or New Hampshire resident, spouse of Maggie Goodland of the 2nd District, put a $25 million bounty for the capture and arrest on Maduro. That's the Biden administration. But Trump goes and gets him, captures him. Now he's back here to face these narco-terrorism and drug charges. Trump goes and gets him. And the reason why you're hearing reaction from some Democrats in Congress, oh, he didn't inform us in time, and this is an overreach, this is outrageous. The reason why you're hearing negative reaction, including national mainstream media that's not even showing the news out of places like Miami, Florida, pointing out that the Biden administration had a $25 million bounty on Maduro. This was a bad guy who's doing bad things with bad adversaries in the United States for a long time. But this is the administration that went and got him successfully, by the way. This wasn't a botched mission. This wasn't like a botched mission where we had helicopters shot down by the Cuban security forces protecting Maduro. No, this was a successful strategic military operation. But because it was Trump, because it was Donald Trump and not a Democrat president, or frankly, anyone else but Trump, you're getting a lot of the negative reaction you're hearing from the Democrat side of the aisle. But make no mistake about it. If this was President Harris who had won and they actually had the gumption and the determination or the courage to go get Maduro, they'd be clapping from the rooftops. Just some commentary. And by the way, you could go back to Panama, Manuel Noriega, Bush Sr., and other times we've gone and gotten bad guys. This was a very successful capture, and I think a lot of people see it for that. But you're watching the mixed reaction here at home because, in my opinion, of the Trump factor. 603-228-2080. Dean Spiliotis on deck next, Southern New Hampshire University. Again, this date in history, you may think it's just, the first Monday after New Year's. No, January 5th, 1776, New Hampshire became the first colony in the early colonies to break away formally from the British Crown and have the audacity and the courage to put a stake in the ground and adopt its own state, New Hampshire Constitution. And New Hampshire, our founding fathers went on to advise Washington and the whole new country of how we did it here. And a lot of people go around this state. They come in and they're buying the new homes. They're spending. We have a very expensive real estate market. People moving here. How about people living here? They don't even appreciate or understand the real history of this incredible independent state called New Hampshire. We'll hear more on that in the 10 o'clock hour. Also, flu season. Quite a spike right now, and I guess it's influenza A, respiratory body aches, fever, and then a lot of stuff here in New Hampshire and Maine spiking right now, so just be aware. It takes about a week. It's been around me, not me, but around me. And folks I know that are usually not really down and out. It's a sofa type, body aches, pain, no energy, fever, respiratory cough. It takes about a week. Hey, Alexa. Hey, Google, worldwide. Play the Pulse of an H. And our poll question up on X this morning at the Pulse of an H. Do you approve?
By Alpine Gold.
Powered by alpinegold.com. Our poll question up on X is, do you approve of the U.S. strategic capture of Maduro? I guess now the former leader of Venezuela. Yes or no? Do you approve of the capture of Maduro? Yes or no? Reminder, on YouTube, we are streaming as well the first hour. If you want to watch us live, streaming on YouTube, our own channel, and everything with us. Everything with us and our network of news talk stations up into Maine, Lakes region, additional FM signals up into the Lakes region, up into Maine, 107.7 FM, 107.3 FM, 98.3 FM HD2 in the Lakes, 1490 AM, 98.1 FM, Seacoast of New Hampshire, Seacoast of Maine, 1270 AM, 98.7 FM HD2, additional Seacoast signal all the way up into Maine as well. Rochester, Dover, Portsmouth, Hampton, you name it. YouTube channel, The Pulse of an H. Our poll question on X, The Pulse of an H. Our app, The Pulse of an H. By the way, kicking off another tour, this time the British Isles. Stay tuned for that if you want to join me in the fall. Hey, Alexa, hey, Google, play The Pulse of an H. Jack Heath, J-Dog on the boards. Back in a moment.
Start your day with a new New Hampshire.
All right. Well, I have a theory, but Dean Spiliotis, who I respect and is a great one of our political analysts and all-stars, political science professor, one of our great partners and sponsors out there with our Penman Pride segment on all the great stuff happening at Southern Hampshire University. Dean Spiliotis, professor there on the political science side. And here we go. Welcome to 2026. And Dean, I just pointed this out. This is the date in history, despite what we'll talk about Venezuela and Maduro and all the reactions since, that New Hampshire really broke away from the British crown and became the first colony to really work on its own constitution on this date in 1776. Pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great piece of history. And I often also tell my students that New Hampshire was the ninth state to ratify the U.S. Constitution. The Congress had originally asked the Constitutional Convention to make it unanimous. They changed the rules, said we need 9. New Hampshire was number 9, and they ratified it in the old meeting house right up at the top of Main Street, where 393 hits North Main. There's a little area there you can still see where the meeting house was. So Concord and New Hampshire, some great history.
Well, our Binney Media building, I believe, is where that sign is. Yep,
right in the corner there. Yep.
Well, we can talk about some politics, including, this is not too profound for me, Governor Walz of Minnesota now saying he won't see re-election amid the whole Somali and the food and all the other daycare fraud stuff. But Dean, let's go to the big news of the weekend. I happen to believe 2 things, and I'm going to let you kind of go with the history or significance here, because I don't want to go back on how many times recent administrations have either gotten partial, quiet consent or full consent of Congress on nabbing bad guys. But the least surprised person on earth that this capture happened should have been and should be Maduro. I mean, talk about Trump warning publicly him over and over again. Hey, look, turn yourself in, give yourself up, or we'll come get you. You can go to any country, but we'll come. And eventually they did. But I think if it was anyone but President Trump or the Trump administration, you'd hear less criticism. You'd have some people questioning overreach. Is it outrageous? Other countries, I expect Putin not to be happy, but domestically in this country and state, if it had been a Democrat, President Harris, hypothetically, and they did this because the Biden administration had $25 million on his head for the same capture, I think people would be clapping from the rooftops. But because it's Trump, you're going to hear a lot of criticism. I may be wrong, but I'll let you run with this one.
Yeah, I mean, I really think, Jack, I think you have, and Happy New Year, by the way. I'm glad to be back on the show in 2026. You have to kind of separate out the actual operation to nab Maduro from kind of the larger kind of sphere of influence, hemispheric policy that seems to be shaping up in the Trump administration. I think, I think in general, people, even Democrats, would agree that getting Maduro out of office was a good thing. The operation, that kind of nabbing somebody,
Can I just intervene for one moment? I read over the weekend, I don't have them in front of me, our congressional Democrats' reaction. And I said earlier, Chris Pappas, I think at least was the most responsible or tempered to at least credit our military for a very strategic, successful operation. Yeah. The other members of the delegation, I don't think any one of them said it was a good thing to get Maduro out of office. I may be wrong. Yeah. I stand to be corrected.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always an element of partisanship injected into this, but getting Maduro out, the impressive military operation, all of that, not typically something that presidents would go to Congress for approval, Democrat or Republican. I think it was sort of within the realm of the commander-in-chief function. The bigger issue is, or there are 2 bigger issues. One is how exactly, if we're going to run Venezuela, what exactly does that mean? And secondly, are we starting to see take shape a policy in which President Trump, as he's doing, threatens various leaders in our hemisphere with potential removal if they don't agree to some sort of extraction of oil or minerals or what have you? I mean, I watched the entire press conference this weekend. President Trump mentioned oil over and over and over again. He only mentioned drugs once at the very end, and I think it was just cocaine. It even mentioned fentanyl. So the concern is this going to be our policy now, where we, leaders that we don't like, the leaders who we can claim are, are dictators? If you don't give us access, we're going to take you out, because we're basically now in Venezuela, as it appears that we are continuing to work with his regime,
right,
if not him.
Right.
And basically telling them, you either give us. This is what essentially Marco Rubio said on all the TV shows this weekend. either they cooperate with us or there will be follow-up action. And so it's not as though we're trying to install the opposition or hold snap elections or anything like that.
Well, it's funny. Two things. Dean Spiliota, Southern Hampshire University, because we have some time. Couple things. One, we can come back to this, but the emergence of the importance of Secretary of State Marco Rubio to this administration. He always seems to be the one. No disrespect to President Trump and what he says after an operation, but Rubio, whether it was the strike, the nuclear strike on the targets in Iran, Rubio is sort of that voice of centrist reason within the Trump administration. He's got a lot of respect, and I think he's from a Secretary of State. He might be, people aren't saying this, but I think he might be one of the more early, if you look at the last year, successful, tempered Secretary of States I've seen in a long time myself. Number two, though, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just
go ahead.
Real quick, he also has real deep expertise and connections in this part of the world, in South America,
right.
Cuba. He's been very active in that part of the world for a long time.
Right. And I think there's a little bit of a tug of war, even if Rubio's not a part of it, with J.D. Vance in that circle of the people around the desk with the president. The other point I was going to make, a younger person asked me going into the weekend, hey, Jack, you can talk about this. I saw you were talking about Venezuela the last few weeks. Pay attention. People weren't. He did it. I go, well, it wasn't too hard. We had an aircraft carrier there. I mean, come on, folks, pay attention. We had a full blockade. It was getting pretty tense.
Yeah.
But he said, was this about the drugs or the oil? And I said, it's a very good question. And I'd be disingenuous and we'd be BSing someone if we didn't say it was probably about both, or it was about both. But to your point, it really was more about the latter, the strategic regional, Tehran, Russia, China, the oil. Venezuela has one of the richest oil reserves and power for the U.S. And what I mean by that is we're not the first time our CIA or our government, regardless of the president, has looked at things like oil or pipelines for the United States, security or strength. The other one is the drugs. I said the drugs, the narco-terrorism and the drugs are going to be why Maduro is going to be in prison the rest of his life. But they were a sort of in-between country for Colombia and cocaine. And more Americans are overdosing in America from synthetic fentanyl from Mexico and the cartels and some of the synthetic operations in China. So if you want to know the truth, Maduro is a bad guy, more in the cocaine smuggling, almost the Colombian kind of thing. But, that's what sunk him. But the real strategic importance of Venezuela is their alliances with bad guys in oil. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, Trump was talking about the U.S. oil companies were going to go in, and I guess Chevron already, has always had some sort of a relationship with Venezuela, but the oil companies are going to go in and rebuild the infrastructure, and they're going to pay for it. We're not going to pay for it. Maybe that'll happen. I don't know enough about kind of the oil industry and how responsive they'll be to this.
Yeah.
I think we're all kind of waiting to see. It sure sounds. I mean, listening to President Trump talk about bringing back Venezuela's oil industry, that really was kind of the centerpiece of their press conference.
And Dean, there's a profound ancillary thought that our news and you alluded to, and I think no one's really connected the dots, but it's right up your alley. There's something else going on. You mentioned that part of the world and sort of the foreign policy that's forming with this administration, but there's something else going on domestically in America. Polls this fall showed that like 76% of younger Democrats had a more favorable view of socialism over capitalism. And you'll see where I'm going with this. And you go back to Hugo Chavez and Maduro, who succeeded him, and the irony and the devastating economy in Venezuela, because in socialism, young people who are enamored with the new mayor of New York City or Ocasio-Cortez or Bernie, they don't understand that socialism may look good on paper, but in reality, socialism and communism, I was explaining to someone close to me over the weekend, if you look at history going back way before Hugo Chavez, when they took over the oil for the people, he became a multi-billionaire. And at the end of his regime, Venezuelans in Caracas were eating meat from the animals in the zoo. The economy was so bad and the inflation was so bad. And what happens in socialism, and it's true even in, I hate to say it, but it's true even in modern day Russia, which isn't really it's a weird setup. the people in the Politburo, the people up top get really, really wealthy, and 90% of the proletariat starve. And when Trump points to Cuba, Cuba's almost fallen. Look at our history with Castro. Colombia, Venezuela, he's indirectly poking the domestic bear on socialism in this country. I don't know if you think that's a stretch or not.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, I talk to younger people all the time, and they just feel like the current system is not working for them in terms of achieving the American dream, owning a house, getting a job. It's cost of living.
Yep.
So they look for other paradigms that at least sound good on paper. They don't have the historical context that people of our age do, and so we'll see how much traction that gets going into the next presidential election cycle for Democrats. But it's certainly becoming an increasingly vocal part of the party, and if that younger generation really gloms onto it, that's going to be it's going to become an increasing voting bloc as well.
Well, you're seeing it already, especially on the Democrat side. Thank you, Dean Spillier. Let us make it a good Monday. Southern New Hampshire University political science professor.
Thanks, Jack.
When we come back, there's some big legislation at the New Hampshire State House. Anna Brown, Citizens Count, citizenscount.org on deck next.
This is the Pulse of live from the Outdoor Pride Studios. Now back to Jack Heath on the Pulse of New Hampshire.
Well, J-Dog calls it Pink Slip Monday in the National Football League. Rory O'Neill a little bit later on we'll have some updates. Our national correspondent, John Decker, also coming up. And J-Dog, let me know if John's on. Our White House correspondent, Anna Brown, Citizens Count, citizenscount.org. And let me just take 20 seconds on Citizens Count. It's probably one of the most robust, not one of, it is, in New Hampshire, certainly for the legislature, the stuff happening at the State House, state senators, state lawmakers, legislation, issues, nonpartisan information for civic knowledge and engagement. And on this date in history, January 5th, 1776, speaking of civic engagement, New Hampshire became really the first colony to break away from the British Crown and work towards its own constitution, something pretty bold for the time. Anna Brown, good. Welcome to 2026.
Welcome to 2026, and yes, happy 250th birthday to New Hampshire Constitution. I'm so glad you brought that up, because the other thing I will say that's interesting about New Hampshire's Constitution, many people don't realize it actually provides more rights than the federal Constitution. So your New Hampshire Constitution, not only was it a leader that was signed even before the Declaration of Independence and includes some, similar language, but it has evolved over time to give you even more protections. And of course, we all hear about it when it comes to, school funding and maybe some of those more boring cases, dare I say. But, there's also a right to revolution in there. There's all sorts of rights. I would encourage anyone to pick up a copy from the Secretary of State or online and get to know what your rights are in New Hampshire, because it's going to become increasingly important given that the U.S. Supreme Court is tossing a lot of these issues back down to the state level.
Yeah. And I look at what, I want to talk about some of the big pieces of legislation. I guess even the death penalty, other things are going to come up this session that we're not, with what's happening in Venezuela, the national stuff, Waltz in Minnesota, the fraud, it's all this other stuff. But the history is worth it for a moment, because, I don't know, Anna, because you swim and live in this environment of public policy. You're just naturally wired that way, and you're such a great resource. You have a great passion for it, knowledge, respect for it. But, and I mean that sincerely. But I look at the history of New Hampshire, and I was pleased that Dane Spiliotis, who was just on with us from Southern New Hampshire University, says he talks to his college students about New Hampshire's history. That makes me feel good. But I look at what we can learn in a very divisive, finger-pointing, politically combative environment about our own history in New Hampshire. I mean, everyone should agree, I don't care what your politics, you could love the current Democrat Party, love Trump in the White House, or not like any of it, but we should all agree that we have some of the richest, most profound early American history. And I grew up north of Boston. I thought Salem, Massachusetts, with the early maritime history, the early stuff in Lexington, Bunker Hill. I thought Marblehead and Salem, arguing over the birthplace of the American Navy, Beverly. I thought it was a pretty cool place. But then I come to New Hampshire and I'm like, oh my goodness, Newcastle, the fort, 1774, armed militia raid a British armed fort for the gunpowder and munitions. The founding of New Hampshire, breaking away as early as we did, the early stuff of our founders in New Hampshire, William Whipple. I mean, I could go on. John Stark. We had an incredible history that could be animated for young people to really appreciate what independence is. It's not free, and what live free or die means. And I just wanted to throw that out there in some commentary.
No, it's absolutely true. I think that we should take a lot of state pride in New Hampshire. Have we done everything perfectly all the time? Of course not. No state or country ever has. But we were so committed to this completely novel idea that government should come from the people and that all people are naturally equal, that originally we didn't even want to call our leader a governor because that was associated with the crown.
Right.
So originally, the leader of New Hampshire was called a president because we were so committed to this idea that we're getting rid of the divine right of kings, and this is about all people coming together and choosing their own form of government. So I could not agree more, Jack. But I am also happy to talk about the legislation up for a vote.
I do want you to get to the laws coming up. That's why I asked you to be on. And before I do, though, because we have some time, speaking of New Hampshire and the governor and that being shy of executive power, our founding fathers, people don't know the executive council was put in place to be a check and balance. And people don't think, wait, why does New Hampshire, why are the governor's terms only 2 years and not 4 years like Massachusetts and Maine? What is this 2 year thing? And speaking of the executive council, John Stephen is going to be, I think, looking forward to attending the meeting Wednesday after his heart attack. So that's pretty cool. But Anna, tell us about legislation coming up.
Yes, absolutely. So the legislature is coming back into session in New Hampshire after being out of session for several months, took the summer break, took study committee time, looking at various issues. And my goodness, there are big votes coming up this Wednesday and Thursday. First of all, I do have to throw out there is a marijuana legalization vote in the House. We know Governor Ayotte is against it. I don't think the Senate will pass it, but it will be interesting to see, is the House going to pass this? Are they going to put some statement out there that shows we're going to try to fight for this? Also, we're looking at several bills that would increase criminal penalties. So, for example, there is an amendment that the House is going to vote on to SB 15 that would allow a sentence of hard labor for capital murder and aggravated felonious sexual assault of a child under age 13. So that's definitely, I don't think we've heard about hard labor sentences in many years. You know, that's a really harsh change from a lot of criminal reform that has gone on in recent years. We're also going to see sort of a continuation of issues around election laws and also school funding. So, for example, or school funding and curriculum, I should say. So, for example, there's a bill that is looking to restrict various materials in schools, looking to require school boards to have policies around that. That's similar to a bill that Governor Ayotte vetoed last year. We're also looking at a bill that would require government-issued photographic ID to vote. So, for example, that would eliminate student ID when you're coming in and you're just showing your ID to vote. And that's different than what is required to register to vote, which has also been, of course, a debate. And now, you need proof of citizenship, which would typically be a birth certificate and so on. So this is restricting that even further. On other social issues, healthcare, there is a bill that would create a right to conscientiously object to participating in providing abortion if you're a healthcare provider. So that means a healthcare employer couldn't act against a doctor or nurse who refused to participate in abortion. That's another one of those abortion-related bills that I'm not sure where Governor Ayotte would land. Because she said, I'm not going to pass any further abortion restrictions. Okay, well, this isn't a restriction. It's giving extra protection to healthcare providers and saying what they can and can't choose to do regardless of where they are working. And then lastly, I'll throw out there's also a bill that's looking to cut business taxes, and it would delay the effective date till 2028. So sort of if there is a loss of revenue, it's sort of saying, oh, well, that's a future legislature's problem. But it is interesting considering we haven't had a great first few months of this budget year. There's a lot of tax uncertainty. So it'll be interesting to see our representatives gung-ho to still be saying, nope, cutting taxes. We're not too concerned about revenue.
That was a good rundown.
Ooh, I feel like I was talking pretty quickly, but I think we got all the really big stuff in there.
If I was taking notes as a college student, I would have to go to AI to get all that. Thank you, Anna Brown, Citizens Count.
Thanks, Jack.
All right, we come back. Neil Levesque, Institute of Politics. The politics in and around the capture of Maduro. Back in a moment.
News, information.
on the Pulse of New Hampshire.
Well, where things go from here, it's just funny because it's just context versus politics. I know it's hard to separate the two, but I do get a kick. I know a lot of people may not, but I still get a kick out of President Trump when he likes to get the attention of the leader of Denmark talking about Greenland, and people forget the history of Greenland and what former president in this country tried to buy it. Wasn't Trump. But I do remember being a civilian at the U.S. Army War College in the National Security Seminar when one of the generals asked the audience of colonels and executive leaders in the military, and I was one of the few civilians, what keeps me up at night? And they all said different things. And I said the Arctic Circle, and he kind of paused and he said, who said that? I was in the audience. I wish I did this more in college at University of Vermont, got some credit. And he laughed. He goes, that's a good answer. It is the Arctic Circle. He goes, I just came back from there. General Abrams said this when we were at the War College doing exercises with our Canadian allies, and China's up there. It's one of the biggest threats to the United States is the Arctic Circle. So when President Trump talks about security in Greenland, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. I just think it's funny sometimes. All right, Neil Levesque, Institute of Politics. I believe J-Dog is joining us. I think he's there. And talking some politics on this Monday, January 5th, by the way, Neil, 1776, a date in great history where New Hampshire became the first colony to have the you-know-what to break away from the British Crown and work on its own constitution. Pretty cool stuff, Neil. Good morning.
Good morning and Happy New Year.
I appreciate that. What do you think about New Hampshire's early place in history?
I think that, unfortunately, Ken Burns skipped over that in his 12-part series, which is surprising because he's from New Hampshire. I think it's an important...
Is he from here or moved here?
Well...
I moved here. That's not my point.
I think he's lived here for 50 years.
Oh, no. He's out in Walpole. No, he's a New Hampshire guy. I'm not saying that. But, hey, Neil, we have some historians coming up in the next hour. I'll leave that to them on this date in history, because I do think it's important for everyone out there, including those moving here from New York and other states, to remember what makes New Hampshire a little bit special, why we have 2-year gubernatorial terms, not 4, why we have an executive council, and why we have the best motto of any state in the union or the world, of any state in any country or province or whatever, live free or die. But Neil, let's talk about Venezuela, because there's some fascinating next things, and we'll see where it goes. But I was looking over the weekend of the New Hampshire congressional delegation reaction to the capture and the operation in Caracas to get Maduro and his wife. And today they'll be in court facing narco-terrorism and drug trafficking and other charges, weapons, you name it. So you and I know, I'm just going to give you the backdrop and let you fill the time, that this has been a bad guy, that former administrations going back to President Obama, or the last 20 plus years, Venezuela has been targeted as a threat to the United States. The Biden administration with Jake Sullivan of New Hampshire had a $25 million bounty on Maduro for his capture and arrest. I didn't see that much on ABC News over the weekend. So Trump had the gumption to do what he said. He warned Maduro. The least surprised person should have been Nicolas Maduro, that they are good guys. The Delta team, the SEALs, went in to wake him up and say, you're coming with us. The delegation, I think Chris Pappas was the most appropriate, really praising the military strategic successful operation. And Gene Shaheen had a statement about, Maduro's not a good guy and all that, and Venezuela, but this, Congress, notifying Congress, this is an overreach and critical. Everything else is critical from the delegation. I was looking from Maggie Goodlander, Chris Pappas, Gene Shaheen, and Maggie Hassan. I was looking for one phrase somewhere in their statements over the weekend. This is a good thing that we got Maduro. I didn't quite see that sentence, Neil.
Well, there's no doubt about the fact that they have definitely put a line in the sand, and that they have a different position than what the action that the president took. I think that this action in general sort of sends a message to people who oppose the United States, and there's no doubt on the fact that it was a military success. I mean, I can't imagine the risk that was involved here. But now the big question mark and where the Democrats stand could be where's the nation building going to take place here? How is this going to happen? And as we've seen in the past, that can be a huge challenge. And they oppose what the president did. There's a lot of partisanship in the world right now, and I think that people take their positions somewhat probably because Trump did it. He didn't notify the 8 members of Congress that usually get notified about these things. There was no coordination there. I don't think that there was also a lot of buildup like there has been in the past.
I disagree. I disagree. I'm not sure if that's your point.
On a political level,
I said. Well, you don't have to be in a political level. I had said for weeks and days on my show going into New Year's Day, hey everyone, pay close attention to Venezuela. I know people are talking about the retail shopping season and the holidays. Pay close attention. This is serious. Tensions are mounting. If you can't see what's coming with an aircraft carrier, CIA and special ops on the ground, the targeting of these drug boats, the warnings to Maduro, if you can't see this one coming, I don't know how you could miss it.
Well, I think as a listener to your show, I heard you say that many, many times. What I mean is on a political level in the United States where people were not necessarily cheering for the removal of him, whether it's the right move or not. I just didn't think that the buildup was the same as it was with Noriega, where there was it seemed a lot more political buildup leading into his extrication, I don't know if that's a word, from Panama. I will say this. I think that it is an interesting move to make when you consider the fact that China would love to do the same thing in Taiwan, or you have places like Russia that invaded Ukraine saying that it was about their security. So you have this situation where it's a policy change, I think, for the president in the fact that, he has been, and I think part of his base has been sort of this non-interventionist, non-using of war material around the world. And so this is a little bit of a risk for him. Again, I think it's all in how Venezuela becomes a more peaceful country in the future. 90% of these people live in poverty, and they have I think the largest resource of oil in the world, and yet 90% of them live in poverty. So whether or not some of that can change moving forward, I don't know.
Wait a minute. I thought Sean Penn was going over there, the actor, to visit the late Hugo Chavez because they were rolling in the money. Remember when they took over the oil for all the people? What I remember on Chavez's last day were 2 things. He was worth a few $1 billion, like all leaders of socialist and communist countries get rich, and the people in Caracas were eating meat and food from the animals in the zoo. True story. And inflation, like eggs and milk in Venezuela, were like, $35 for an egg. That was a good economy with all that oil for Chavez.
The other big risk here is that Maduro's going before the court in New York today. The American legal system, I think a lot of people would argue, and I would definitely, that is set up so that criminals have a lot of chances to get off. And there's a lot of risk that, if this thing for some reason gets thrown out of court or he's found not guilty, then what?
What? Crazier things have happened. Crazier things have happened. All right, Neil. I guess next time you're on, we'll talk a little bit about the midterms, which are sure to heat up here, especially that U.S. Senate race.
Thank you, Jack.
All right. Neil Levesque, Institute of Politics, St. Anselm College. Top of the 10 o'clock, we're going to be getting a check-in from one of our political analysts and all-stars. Brad Card will tell us what's going on in Congress. Anna Brown told us what's going on in the State House in Concord with new laws, everything from the death penalty to some other, even abortion-type debates locally. And then we talk some history. Sue Polidoro and a guest will talk about this date in history, January 5th, 1776, New Hampshire. First colony to break away from the British Crown. Took a lot of guts. Live free or die. Great motto. Back in a moment.